Jamarl Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So invariably, when I do a video bashing the two parties, and I'll use the term bashing because they need to be bashed. They're a problem. They get in our way. Anything that you this is a departure, but anything that you substantively want done has to go through our political apparatus. That political apparatus is being held hostage, essentially by two parties. Unfortunately, those two parties are not differences per se. Those two parties, for the most part, are the same thing. They're just different wings of the same thing. Both parties agree on the process the way it is. Both parties, for the most part, agree on the system the way it is. They may have degrees of range of movement in the sense of what they think is off bounds or what they think is acceptable. That part's true. But ultimately, there's no fundamental difference between them. In the basic model of things, the basic order of things, the arrangement, they agree. They agree. Invariably, when I have that conversation, in whatever form I'm having that conversation, somebody would say, well, wait a minute. What about the Greens? What about the Greens? Let's have some tough love for the Green Party. Tough love for the Green Party. I've been slightly bashed by some very animated Green Party members. Not because I said necessarily anything bad about the Greens, but more so because I think they took it as if I was not acknowledging their presence. Like, do you remember in I can't think of the name of it. It was a movie with the white beings, those alien beings who they just made a sequel to it. But there's a scene in it where the guy is in a wheelchair and the alien creature is about to kill him, and then he just kind of walks away. And he's like, how dare you walk away from me? How dare you not acknowledge my presence and murder me like you murdered these other people? That's kind of the way it feels. It's like you didn't acknowledge us as an actual threat, as an actual third party. Yes, you are a third party. That's true. But you have certain problems that you need to deal with before you can actually be considered a threat. So I'm going to put it politely. Now, some of these problems are within your power. Some are not within your power. Some are not within your power. But you need to find a way to mitigate those problems, because otherwise, nothing gets done unless you can undermine it. Now, asking me what I feel about the Green Party is the wrong question to ask. I like your platform. I absolutely like your platform. The 4 pillars, you got me. You had me at hello. That's not the problem. If you need to come to a fundamental truth that some lefties sometimes forget and don't necessarily realize. Arguments aren't necessarily won based on rational conversation. Like, you can be right and still lose an argument. You can be right and still lose an argument. When is the last time you've heard a senator get on the floor of Congress, makes this awesome speech, and the other senators get up and say, you know what? You were right. I had a completely different idea of what I was about to say, but since you put it that way, I'm going to go this different route. It has nothing to do with arguments. It has nothing to do with arguments in that sense, at least not on the overt level. On the overt level, that's stagecraft. Ultimately, when you get to that level of, I'm in Congress giving a speech, you're not trying to get additional information. You're putting out a message because you're trying to do a very specific point. You're tailoring your message for a very specific audience. You understand what's going to take place in that regard. The people who agree with you are going to agree with you. The people who disagree with you, for the most part, are still going to disagree with you. Like, it's not so much that this guy, for instance, you can go online and you will see somebody say, here's this video where so-and-so smashes this particular candidate. You're watching. You can go online and see the exact opposite of the video. The exact same video with the person saying the exact opposite. Watch this other candidate smash this other candidate. Like, the argument itself is almost secondary. Or at the very least, the argument is not necessarily won at the level of expression, meaning the very act of having this conversation. It's not necessarily them trying to have an argument about who they're going to win. It's about messaging to a particular constituency. What I'm getting at is, and I'm sorry, it's a slightly long-winded way of saying it, it's not enough for you guys to have awesome policy. Like, it's not enough to say, look, we have these 4 pillars, and progressives should be inclined to like this. All of that's true, but again, that has nothing to do with whether or not you're going to get support and whether or not you can win the actual argument. That's all I'm saying. Whether I like you or not is irrelevant. Can you win is the question. That's the question. How do you win? How do you get over this hump that you guys are in? I mean, for the most part, you had an election where the majority of the population disliked both candidates. For the past 4 or 5 months leading up to the election, most of the conversation was, holy shit, how do we end up in this situation? That was the conversation. And yet, she still couldn't break the 5% barrier. So, there has to be something else. There's more to it. Now, in the sense of things that you can't control, or the things that you don't necessarily have means to control right off the bat, but you're going to have to find a way to mitigate, the parties themselves. When the parties, you've heard me make this point of there's a collusion between media and politics. Well, there is a collusion between media and politics. Meaning, there's a narrative that gets put out. That narrative that gets put out through media. Now, politicians use media and media use politicians. Media feeds on them like for access, for information, for stories. Hey, you want to slip a story out? I'm your source. You can depend on me. I'm not going to write anything bad about you. I'm going to keep the conversation within certain boundaries. But ultimately, if you need me, you got me. Now, investigative journalists, for the most part, begins to take a backseat to access. You do have some intrepid reporters, like in The Intercept. What's the other gentleman? I can't think of his name. The one who did the Bin Laden leak, or the Bin Laden story, saying that Pakistan essentially gave him up. So you do have a few investigative journalists. But the relationship between the press and the politics is not adversarial. It's somewhat neutral. Meaning state puts out a story, the media is for the most part neutral to that story. Meaning it's almost like if you're not going to be antagonistic towards state, meaning if you're not going to hold power accountable, then you're just functioning as state media. You're just functioning as state media. Now, you're going to have to go through that though. Like, so it's almost like you have to recognize that, okay, the media apparatus is functioning to some degree at the behest of the two parties. Meaning I am going to have a hard time breaking through that. Meaning I need to find other ways to mitigate that process. Now, the parties themselves also have a vested interest in keeping you out of the process. Democrats depend on I am least worse. That is our motto. That is the thing we base our living off. We are less worse. Yes, we're capitalists. Yes, we're okay with you guys being screwed over in regards to workforce and everything else in society. Yes, we're okay with that. But we're a little bit less worse than them because those guys are really going to rail you over. Now, if you had another part of that political thing, another vehicle in that process, then they can't make that argument. That argument goes away. That argument goes away. They're going to have to actually do something. They're going to be held to some degree accountable. Now, that's until the Green Party gets corrupted, in which case you're back to where you were in the first place. But at least in this particular process, the point I'm making is those two parties have a symbiotic relationship. That symbiotic relationship does not want to have a third party in that mix. A third party holds the other two parties accountable. And it creates a different permutation in the way these parties behave. Meaning Democrats can no longer rest on we're least worse. We're the moderates of the bunch. Because at that point, they're not. Many of the independents will probably vote green in that capacity. Now, in order to prevent that, they've relegated themselves to keeping Greens off the stage. So, in this collusion between media and politics, in this symbiotic relationship, they've made the decision that mainstream is what we are. The 6 media companies that control everything that people see and hear for the most part outside of the internet makes the determination on who are we going to put on mainstream news? Who are we going to put in the public's eye? Now, the politicians themselves like this because they can say, well, we're going to get on stage with these guys. And we may even sign contracts to say that nobody else can get on the stage unless XYZ takes place. And guess what? That XYZ is going to be to the benefit of, guess who? The two parties. Because again, those two parties don't want anybody on stage. So they would say, you need 15% to get on stage. Well, that's arbitrary. Where did you get that 15% from? That seems pretty damn arbitrary to me. And that seems pretty beneficial to the parties themselves. How is this person going to get 15% if nobody knows who this person is? This is a chicken and an egg thing. You need to be on that stage to some degree in order to even get the public to even know who you are. Meaning the access is limited based upon the people with capital. All of the stuff is tilted in that direction. Now, yes, the owner class, the elites, in that sense, like it in that way because capital is the entry point. Democrats and Republicans like it because they could exclude other parties, meaning those are two corporations. What other corporation wants somebody else to hone in on their market share? The market share in this point is political capital. So yes, those two corporations that have a monopolistic lock on the political process strives to keep that monopolistic, oh God, Jesus Christ, that word is hard to say, monopolistic lock on the political process. So yes, they have a vested interest in keeping any other party out the process, including Greens, particularly Greens, at least for Democrats, because Democrats would lose votes to Green voters. The other part of this problem is, of course, image. And this one is on you. Now, lefties sometimes make this point that, well, my argument is the right argument, meaning based upon real world phenomena that's taking place on the ground, this argument is correct. It should win. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Meaning the image that I have of the Greens is in some degree going to give me an image of whether or not you guys are credible. The problem is, again, mainstream news. And I'm saying mainstream almost as a pejorative at this point. But the power center, the news or the focal point of the power center itself says, all right, here are the news that we're going to focus on. You guys need to find some way to break into that bubble or find a way to get support outside that bubble. It's one or the other. If you're going to get into power, you got to find a way to get around it. That's the point I'm getting at. Part of this is people have to see you as being credible, meaning they need to see you as an alternative, a real alternative. If they can't see you as that, then you're always going to have trouble getting those people to see you as a credible party. That's not fair. It's just the way it is. You have to deal with events on the ground. It's like you go to war with the army you have, not the army that you want. Now the question becomes, how do you get around that? And how do you deal with that? How you don't deal with it is running a candidate every 4 years. I'm not against Jill Stein. I voted for Jill Stein. But certainly you need a better strategy. Like the strategy is not getting you anywhere. And I have to be honest, I don't even fully know what that strategy could be. I would argue if you tackle local events and build up to something, that's not splashy, that's not sexy, none of that stuff. But if you can find a way to conserve enough influence to tackle one specific state and grow, like to radiate outward, maybe. Right now, your problem is legitimacy. Well, it's not even legitimacy. It's you can always be put in a corner by the other two parties just because those two parties have media influence. The media influence gives them a layer of respectability, of legitimacy. The legitimacy is not real per se. It's only real because that's it's given to them in that way. It's fickle. They're legitimate because they're legitimate. Think of how Sanders' campaign was. Initially, Sanders was ignored. They pretended he didn't exist. They would have an empty stand of Donald Trump before even acknowledging Sanders. At a certain point, they didn't have a choice but to acknowledge Sanders. They didn't have a choice. He asserted himself that sternly into the public consciousness where they had to actually acknowledge him in that regard. I'm saying whatever you do, you need to assert yourself so thoroughly into the public consciousness that you're considered mainstream. You need to normalize yourself if that's the case. I've had people who had no idea who Jill Stein was. And I know that's not Jill Stein's fault. I'm just saying that's something you need to overcome. That's a hurdle you need to overcome. How do you overcome it? I'm uncertain. I beat my head on this because I've wanted to make this video for a while, and I have to be honest, I am uncertain on how you overcome that hurdle. I would argue that one thing I would think of is organizing with the other groups. And I would even think of changing, and I know you're going to hate me saying this, changing your name or affiliating yourself with the other groups with this idea of we're getting our agenda accomplished, even though we're not necessarily going under the name of Greens. And the only reason I say this is because Greens have a certain connotation. There's an image about it. The image to me is awesome because I like what you guys stand for, and I think ultimately you guys are right in the direction that you guys are going. But you're talking about the rest of the country. The rest of the country have no clue. Most of the country doesn't even know there's a greater world out there, let alone that the Greens are a major party in the other parts of the world. They're oblivious. They're functioning here. If you can somehow harness the energies of all these different groups in a way where you can pull all those things together, because you're right, you are a real party. You're in all 50 states. But you need to accrue things to you. Like in and of yourself, it's not enough. The arguments that you make can't be based on what's right. The argument has to be based on what's advantageous to the person you're talking to. That somewhat goes against the Greens' philosophy. I understand that, which means that this is going to be someone invisible to you. When you guys get up there and you're doing campaigns, you're doing these campaigns based on this moral thing. This thing of, this is morally right. This is morally just. We're going to have a society that's geared towards the human being. And in doing so, we're going to have a more fair and just society. I agree with you. Your argument is correct from a humanist standpoint. But not everybody is functioning off a humanist context. Meaning, from their context, the argument is not going to fly. You need to be a little bit more base in the way that you're presenting that argument. Meaning, you need to be very specific to how that's going to advantage them personally. And not just that, you have a different hurdle also. It's not just how is it going to advantage you, but also that we are indeed a legitimate party. I watched one of the videos that the Green Party did where they were talking about the 4 pillars. And there was one particular part of the video where he's asserting that we're a real party. He's being real strong in that point, which means that he is very sensitive about that point. I can understand why you guys will be sensitive about it. Democrats and everything else have pretty much beat up on you saying third-party votes are crazy and everything else. Those people have a vested interest in saying that. They're full of shit. Don't listen to those people. The third-party vote is immensely important, particularly in regards to holding the other 2 parties accountable. Even if you don't have the capacity to get elected, you at least need the capacity to be able to injure the other party to make that party lose. Right now, you don't have that capacity. I know Hillary Clinton wants to blame you guys and all this other stuff, but it's not really true. If you have that capacity, you to some degree can influence the behavior of the political process, which is what you want to do. Now, you want to go beyond that level of just being able to influence it indirectly. You want to be able to influence it directly, meaning you want to get your people elected. I'd make this argument that you want to do that locally. Your power, for the most part, is expanded from a local context. Maybe not necessarily from a national context, but you can use that local base to grow. You can use it to grow. But I have to be honest, I'm uncertain on how you would do this left to your own devices. The only system I can come up with that works, or that may work, is for you to create symbiotic relationships with other groups. Meaning, Progressive Independence Party, Socialists, Marxists, hell, Communists, leftists of all sorts, Democrats that are on the far left, environmentalists, all these groups, literally, cobble together a nerve center of sorts and pull all those groups in under your wing. Your problem still is going to remain legitimacy, or the perspective of legitimacy of the audience itself. But ultimately, you can come up with immense numbers just by pulling all those people in, all those webs in, because ultimately your platform is engaged with all those other people. All those groups are, for the most part, Green Party members. They don't know it, but they are, just in their political philosophy for the most part. Pull them in. Pull them in. I don't know what your resources are. I don't necessarily know the number of members that you have. So it's hard for me to give concrete advice on what you guys can do. But my feeling is if there's any level of group itself, you're in political alignment with, I know Bernie-crats. I know you're in political alignment with many Bernie Sanders supporters. I know you're in political alignment with even some far left Democrats. Those people just don't know that they're Green Party members. That's all. Your goal is to figure out a way to make them know it. Make them know that they're Green Party members in political philosophy, but also make them know it in the sense that you can win. I guarantee you that's the biggest hurdle that you guys have in general. The perception that you can win, not so much on whether or not you can win. The perception is more important in this case, because ultimately the thing that pulls away votes from you is, I don't want my vote wasted. You need to get across to them that their vote is not wasted through a third party, meaning you have the capacity to win. Yeah, it means you have to have the capacity to win. If you can shock some people in some local elections, you can change that. You can change it. But it has to be done in a way that people are aware of it. Yeah, it has to be done in a way where people are aware of it. But that's your hill. That's the hill that you need to climb. You're going to hate me saying this, but I'd argue your hopes may be better off aligning yourself with something new, only because people have a different perspective of something that's new. Any connotation that they have associated with the Green Party would essentially wash away. It becomes irrelevant. Whatever this new thing is, Progressive Independence Party, whatever the party is, People's Party or Party of the 99%, whatever. Ultimately, you're still getting your philosophical beliefs in that particular thing, even though the people aren't necessarily associating that party with your own philosophical beliefs. You lose any baggage that's associated with the Green Party while gaining this new political institution that people may be drawn to. That's the only reason why I say it depends on how committed you are in getting your ideas accomplished, as opposed to having a certain level of ego associated with the group itself. So I'll leave it at that. I like the Green Party. I do. I actually like you guys. I just wish you guys could do more. That's it. That's all. I just want you guys to be somewhat of a political vehicle for the left. And right now, for whatever reason, you guys are not a political vehicle for the left. I need you guys to beef up in this regard. I just don't necessarily know how to beef you up. Outside of the commentary I made in this video, it's an enigma to me. I've been thinking about it for a few weeks now, and I haven't necessarily come to any real consensus on what it's a clear path forward. Yes, it's somewhat arrogant. And yes, you should probably bring in other minds to bring into that process. But this was just me kind of like, how the hell do you get a Green Party person elected, not for president, but for governor, for state representatives, for Senate, that type of thing? To the very least become a political thing. I need you as a vehicle. That's all. I'll leave it at that. All right, guys. If you enjoyed the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support the work through Patreon. Thank you.